An armed gang stormed a bank, taking customers and employees hostage. Soon, the police surrounded the entire area, and long negotiations with the gang members began. After hours of discussions, the police decided to storm the bank to end the crisis. But when they entered, a shocking surprise awaited them. The criminals had vanished without leaving a single trace or clue. Despite the police having completely surrounded the bank from all sides, the big question remained. Where did the thieves go, and how did they manage to escape? Our true story begins in the heart of Germany's capital, Berlin, on Saturday, June 17, 1995, at 10 a.m., when the police and special forces moved quickly towards a bank in response to a reported robbery. Upon arriving at the scene and securing the entire perimeter, they discovered that 16 employees and customers were being held hostage inside the bank by 3 armed men wearing masks to conceal their faces. The robbers were heavily armed with machine guns, pistols, and hand grenades. Realizing the severity of the threat, the police called in military tactical forces to assist. Snipers were quickly deployed on the rooftops of nearby buildings, and within minutes, the bank was surrounded from all sides. Meanwhile, media outlets rushed to the scene, broadcasting the news across the entire country. The authorities completely shut down the area, preventing any civilians or unauthorized persons from entering. The police and officials then established a direct line of communication with the gang inside the bank to learn their demands. After 30 minutes of negotiation, one of the armed men released a hostage who was carrying a message from the gang. In this message, the gunman demanded a ransom of $12 million. The message also contained a warning. Any attempt by the police to storm the bank would immediately lead to the hostages being shot, followed by an exchange of gunfire with the police. As time passed, the police tried to reopen negotiations with the gang, asking them to release some hostages before handing over the ransom money. However, the armed men firmly refused the police's demands and stuck to their position. When the police tried to reach out again, the gang's response was shocking. They cut off all lines of communication and refused to speak or negotiate for 5 long hours. During this tense period, the police and authorities waited anxiously, completely in the dark about what was happening inside the bank and unable to act. Finally, at 6 p.m., the silence was broken. One of the hostages, a young mother, was forced to call a local radio station in Berlin. With a trembling, terrified voice, she pleaded for help and begged for the lives of all the hostages. This move was a very clever tactic by the gang. The public sympathy for the hostages skyrocketed, especially after hearing the desperate voice of a mother begging for her life. This put immense pressure on the police and authorities to meet the gang's demands and deliver the ransom quickly. However, despite the growing public pressure and mounting tension, the police refused to yield and stood firm on their decision to not give in to the demands. They continued to surround the bank without offering any official response. Meanwhile, the gang also held their ground, refusing any direct communication with the police. An hour later, the police started to raise some troubling questions. Why was the gang refusing to negotiate directly, yet allowing hostages to call the radio and ask for help? Something felt strange and suspicious. In any case, the police still refrained from taking any real action, choosing to continue observing and waiting. But just moments later, the gang announced that their patience had run out and they began firing shots into the air. When the police heard the gunfire coming from inside the bank, a wave of panic and tension spread among the security forces. No one knew exactly what was happening. Many feared that the gunmen had started executing the hostages. Immediately, the security commanders gathered to urgently discuss all possible options for dealing with the situation. One officer even suggested bringing in an armored truck to storm the bank by force. However, before any plan could be put into action, something strange and unexpected happened that completely shifted the situation. Suddenly, a masked gunman emerged from the bank, dragging one of the hostages with him. He walked straight toward the police and the watching media and shouted angrily, "We will start executing the hostages one by one if you don't meet our demands immediately." This direct and public threat dramatically increased the pressure on the police and the authorities, who now found themselves caught between the urgent need to save the hostages and the danger of escalating the situation even further. After intense discussions between the police and government officials, they decided to take a strategic step to de-escalate the crisis. They agreed to provide 1/3 of the ransom demanded by the gunmen, about $4 million, as a gesture of good faith to show the robbers they were serious about resolving the situation peacefully. At 7:30 p.m., the ransom money was delivered to the gang by a police officer, who was forced to strip down to his underwear to prove he wasn't carrying any hidden weapons. After receiving the ransom money, the gunman once again cut off all means of communication, leaving the police in a state of anxious anticipation for 2.5 hours, with no updates, no movements, and no idea what the armed men were doing inside the bank. Everything remained still until the police phone rang again. This time, the call was from the gang members themselves, using the bank's phone. They demanded that the police bring a bus to the front of the bank, with the remaining ransom money placed inside it. Additionally, they requested a helicopter to be stationed in a nearby neighborhood. The gang informed the police that they would leave the bank and board the bus at exactly 2 a.m. The police agreed to the gang's demands. They prepared the bus with the requested money inside, and by midnight, the bus was parked in front of the bank, ready with all the arrangements. A helicopter was also prepared and waiting at the specified location. However, when 2 a.m. arrived, the gunmen did not move as they had promised. This indicated that they were still inside the bank. The police decided to wait and monitor the situation for another hour and a half. At 3:30 a.m., the police received another call from inside the bank, but this time, it wasn't from the gang members. It was the bank manager himself, his voice trembling with fear. He told the police that all the gunmen had gone down to the basement floor and hadn't been seen since. Without hesitation, the police command gave a direct order for the special forces to storm the bank immediately. When they entered, they quickly secured the ground floor, finding all the hostages alive and unharmed. They evacuated the hostages safely from the building. Then, the Special Forces officers moved down to the basement. They searched it thoroughly, but to their shock, they found no one there. The Special Forces quickly moved down to the basement and surrounded the vault door from both sides. They carefully opened it slightly, then tossed a flashbang grenade inside. After the explosion, they stormed the vault with full force, only to be met with an unexpected and shocking discovery. There was no one inside. Instead, they found that more than 200 safety deposit boxes had been broken into, and their contents, cash, jewelry, and precious valuables worth millions of dollars, had been stolen. The most baffling part was that the gang had completely vanished from the bank without leaving a single trace, despite the fact that the police had surrounded the area from every angle. Once again, the same burning question arose: where did they go? For many, this heist is considered the smartest and most brilliantly executed bank robbery in history. As it turned out, the mastermind behind the entire operation was not a criminal mastermind or an ex-military strategist, but rather a former X-ray technician at a hospital in Germany. After being fired from his job due to personal issues and finding himself unemployed and unwanted by other employers, he made a fateful decision. Rather than accept defeat, he would plan and execute the heist of a lifetime. With the help of a small group of friends and acquaintances, he meticulously crafted a plan that would allow them to steal over $12 million worth of cash and precious jewelry, and then vanish without a trace. How did this ordinary man, a simple technician, transform himself into the mastermind behind one of the greatest bank robberies in history? And how did he and his crew manage to disappear so completely, leaving behind nothing but questions and an empty vault? The protagonist of our story is a Syrian man named Khaled al-Barazi, who left his home country and moved to Germany in 1986, seeking a better life. After spending a short time in the German capital, Berlin, he managed to land a job as an X-ray technician assistant at a local hospital. However, his dreams of a better life quickly faded. His income was barely enough to survive. Feeling trapped by his circumstances, Khaled slowly drifted into the world of crime. He began by stealing medical supplies and equipment from the hospital, but over time, he escalated his activities and got involved in drug trafficking. It didn't take long before the police caught up with him, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison from 1991 to 1993. Inside prison, Khaled met a like-minded individual named Jambrium. The two men quickly formed a strong bond, realizing they shared the same ambitions: to pull off the biggest bank heist Germany had ever seen. After their release from prison, they immediately began searching for the perfect target across the streets of Berlin. Khaled's brother, Tony, owned an auto repair shop in an upscale district of the city. Khaled focused his search on that wealthy neighborhood. After extensive scouting, they finally chose their target, a branch of the Commerce Bank. To scout the bank without raising suspicion, Khaled dressed dressed in a sharp, professional suit and posed as a client interested in the bank's secure deposit services. A bank employee happily guided him to the basement, where hundreds of safety deposit boxes were securely stored. The moment Khaled laid eyes on them, he could almost taste the riches hidden behind those metal doors. After leaving the bank, Khaled realized he and Jambrium would need a third member, someone with specialized skills, because executing such a complex operation would require a multidisciplinary team. Thus, Khaled proposed that his old friend Ibrahim join their secret operation. Upon hearing the idea, Ibrahim was immediately excited and accepted without hesitation. Now, with 3 minds combined, they started crafting a master plan to rob the bank. Using the city's public archives, they managed to obtain the original blueprints of the bank building. To their surprise, the plans revealed that the bank was originally a clothing store before being converted into a financial institution. Thanks to the blueprints, Khaled discovered a critical weakness. The floor of the basement was relatively fragile, a crucial detail. He realized they could dig a tunnel beneath the building. Luckily for them, Berlin's soil is mostly sandy and easy to excavate. The challenge, however, wasn't the digging itself. It was finding the perfect starting point for the tunnel and ensuring they could navigate underground without being detected. After days of searching, they found the perfect spot, an abandoned garage about 200 meters away from the bank. Wasting no time, Khaled approached the garage owner, posing as a Greek merchant in need of storage space for his goods. After a brief negotiation, they struck a rental agreement. With the base of operations secured, the next step was assembling a dedicated crew to execute the plan. First, Khaled recruited his brother, Tony, the owner of a nearby auto repair shop, someone familiar with tools and machinery. Meanwhile, Ibrahim tapped into his connections within Berlin's Arab community, recruiting a tough and trusted man named Musa. Thus, the final team of 5 was formed: Khaled Albarazi, the mastermind; Tony, his brother and mechanic expert; Jambrium, the strategist; Ibrahim, the networker; Musa, the muscle. In June 1994, the 5 of them began working on digging the tunnel from the garage. The operation was complex and divided into 2 stages. The first stage was digging the sand and removing it from the tunnel, and the second was reinforcing the tunnel to prevent it from collapsing. They used over 3 tons of wood and metal to create a strong support structure that would keep the tunnel stable and prevent its collapse. Additionally, they installed ventilation pipes and electrical wires to provide light inside the tunnel. They worked continuously for 12 to 14 hours a day, with 2 or 3 of them taking turns in the digging. Khaled and his team called this project the Dream and continued to work without stopping for 5 straight months, overcoming all difficulties to complete their plan. Despite all the efforts made during this time, they had only managed to dig a third of the distance toward the bank. In order to reach the bank faster, Khaled proposed a very clever plan. Since they were digging directly towards the bank, they knew this would take more time and effort. Instead, Khaled's plan was to dig in the direction of the stormwater drainage pipe, which is used during heavy storms and rain. This pipe extended along the street and came very close to the bank. After months of continuous work, Khaled and his team managed to reach the stormwater pipe, cross through it, and reach the area near the bank. Then, they began digging a new tunnel from the pipe to the basement of the bank where the vaults were. However, this stage was more difficult than the previous tunnel, as they faced a major challenge. They needed to dispose of the dirt generated by the digging outside the tunnel. The distance to return it to the garage was very far. Despite these obstacles, the team continued digging, but this time at a much slower pace, and they continued digging for a few more days. One day, something unexpected happened during their work in the tunnel. Khaled noticed that workers were operating directly above the exact area where they were digging. These workers were performing maintenance on cables located right above the tunnel. Khaled and his friends realized they had to act quickly. They decided to remove the supports from one part of the tunnel and let it collapse. The workers digging above during maintenance would otherwise discover the tunnel, and the whole plan would fail. Due to this sudden development, they decided to temporarily stop digging. They waited until the workers above completed their job, which lasted a full 4 months. Luckily, the workers never discovered the tunnel at all. After months of waiting, Khaled and his team resumed their work. They continued digging toward the bank's vault. Finally, after about a year of hard work and digging, they managed to reach the vault of the bank. Ibrahim suggested that they sneak into the basement through the tunnel at night during the weekend holiday. This way, they would have enough time to steal everything and escape without trouble. However, they faced a new challenge. The bank was equipped with surveillance cameras and advanced alarm systems. This meant there was a high chance of being caught during the operation. Therefore, they needed a new plan to distract the police. That's when Khalid came up with a crazy idea. On the morning of Saturday, June 1995, Khalid, along with his brother Tony and their friend Ibrahim, stormed into the bank through the front door, heavily armed. Upon entering the bank, they took everyone inside hostage. At first, the operation appeared to be just another typical armed robbery, which led the police to focus solely on negotiating with them. During these negotiations, Khalid and Tony managed the hostages and spoke with the police. Meanwhile, their friend Ibrahim went down to the basement, entered the bank vault, and began digging a small hole in the floor. Through that hole, the remaining two members of the team, who were still in the tunnel underground, entered the bank. Using drilling machines and necessary tools, they accessed the vault. Once inside, they started breaking the locks of the safety deposit boxes and opening them, taking advantage of the chaos upstairs to carry out their mission unnoticed. When the police arrived at the scene, Khalid sent one of the hostages out carrying a message demanding a ransom. After a few hours, they released another hostage, and then they cut communication with the police for 5 whole hours. The main goal of these actions wasn't just to show goodwill, it was to confuse and distract the police, buying more time. During that time, the rest of the gang in the basement worked non-stop to open as many safety deposit boxes as possible. Once they breached them, they discovered real treasures of gold and jewelry. They began filling bags with the stolen items. Then they loaded them onto a special sled to quickly transport them through the tunnel to the garage. Meanwhile, Khalid continued to outsmart the police with his brilliance, using a clever new trick by allowing one of the hostages to speak live on a radio station. This move dramatically increased pressure on the police and authorities, making them nervous and hesitant to launch any sudden intervention. Then, Khalid added another trick to intensify the pressure. He fired 2 bullets into the ceiling. This gave the impression that the situation had become more dangerous, buying his team more time to steal and escape. The police believed that the gunman had begun shooting at the hostages, which significantly raised tensions. Out of fear that things would escalate, the authorities agreed to deliver part of the ransom to the gang. The police handed over $4 million to Khalid and his crew, while they were still opening more safety deposit boxes in the vault. After they finished collecting the loot, they demanded a bus and a helicopter as part of their escape plan. That was the last communication between the gang and the police. After midnight, while everyone was distracted, the gang members quietly descended through the hole they had dug in the vault floor. They crawled through the tunnel and reached the garage. Meanwhile, the police had surrounded the bank from every direction, waiting for the robbers to exit through the front door. But Khalid and his team had already slipped right under their feet without being noticed. Once they reached the garage, they immediately fled the scene, carrying with them more than $12 million in cash and jewelry. Shortly after, the special forces stormed the bank. It didn't take long before the police discovered the tunnel used by the thieves. When they followed its path, it led them directly to the garage. On the other hand, the thieves had planned everything with extreme precision. They left no trace behind. That night, the members of the gang quietly returned to their homes as if nothing had happened. They sat in front of their televisions, watching news reports about their own crime. Khalid was completely confident in the success of his plan and certain that they had left no evidence behind. He ordered everyone to stay in Berlin and continue living their daily lives normally, without raising any suspicions. However, the police were not ready to give up so easily. A special investigation team of 60 detectives was formed, all determined to solve the mystery of the robbery. The team began by analyzing and investigating every step of the operation, looking for any clue that could lead them to the gang. Their first task was to thoroughly examine the bank, but they found nothing. Not a single fingerprint or trace of DNA belonging to any of the robbers. Next, the investigators questioned the hostages, hoping one of them might have noticed something useful or had information that could help identify the suspects. The only information they managed to gather was that the gunman might have been of Arab origin, based on their accents while speaking. Immediately, the detectives turned their attention to the owner of the garage. After questioning him, he told them he had rented the garage to a man who claimed to be a Greek merchant, and that was all he knew about him. The investigators continued their search, looking for any sign or clue that could lead them to the thieves. Suddenly, luck began to favor the investigators. A construction worker who was working in a building near the garage told them that he had seen 3 men with Arab features dumping sand at the building where he was working. The investigators went to the location and took a small sample of the sand to be tested in the lab. The tests revealed that this sand was an exact match to the sand found inside the tunnel. This meant that the men dumping the sand at the construction site were members of the gang. Based on the description provided by the construction worker, the police created composite sketches of the suspects. These sketches were soon published in newspapers and broadcast on television in the hope that someone would recognize them. A few days later, the police received a call from an anonymous person who said that a man working at a car repair shop near the bank resembled one of the faces shown in the release sketches. That man turned out to be none other than Tony Albarzi, Khaled's brother. Immediately, the police headed to his workshop and began questioning him. They asked him several questions, but he repeatedly insisted that he knew nothing about the robbery or anyone who might be involved. However, the investigators did not believe his story. Their suspicions only grew stronger. During the interrogation, one officer noticed that Tony was drinking juice. He waited until Tony finished, then quietly took the bottle without raising suspicion. The bottle was sent to the lab to analyze the fingerprints. They also checked his name in their database. The results showed that Tony had a brother named Khaled Albarzi, a man who had been imprisoned a few years earlier for multiple criminal charges. From that moment on, Khaled and Tony became the primary suspects in the case. The police focused their entire investigation on them. However, they still lacked enough evidence to arrest them. During this time, the authorities decided to conduct a full inspection of the tunnel. They requested assistance from the army to carry out a precise scan before dismantling it. The tunnel was scanned using the latest technologies in an attempt to find any trace that could lead to the culprits. Despite all efforts made by the police and the military, they failed to uncover any solid evidence. The army returned to the site once again and began dismantling the tunnel. This time, they used advanced infrared scanning technology. Every piece of wood removed from the tunnel was carefully examined. After thorough inspection, they finally found the first piece of real evidence. A fingerprint was discovered on one of the wooden planks used to support the tunnel. That fingerprint was the only piece of evidence the investigators had, but it was enough. The fingerprint belonged to Tony Albarzi. Following this discovery, the police immediately arrested Tony and brought him in for questioning. The investigators continued to interrogate him for 7 straight hours. During the interrogation, Tony became extremely nervous and anxious. The investigators continued to pressure him until he finally broke down and confessed. He told them everything, revealing the full details of the operation and the names of all gang members, led by his brother Khaled, the mastermind behind the heist. The police quickly moved to arrest the rest of the gang. They managed to capture Khaled and Jayambriam while they were trying to flee Germany. As for the remaining 2 members, Ibrahim and Musa, they were also tracked down and arrested. Faced with overwhelming evidence, they confessed to their crimes. After being found guilty of the charges, their trial lasted a few more months. The court sentenced them to prison terms ranging from 5 to 10 years. Except for Khaled, who received 14 years as the mastermind of the operation. Khaled had a golden opportunity to flee immediately after the robbery, but chose to stay in Berlin, confident that the police would never find any evidence linking him to the crime. His arrogance and overconfidence were the reasons for his downfall. But despite the police arresting all the gang members, most of the stolen money remained a mystery. The authorities managed to recover only 1/3 of the total amount, about $4 million. While the remaining $8 million disappeared completely. No one knew where the money had gone. Khaled was the only person who knew the location of the missing fortune. He refused to speak despite several attempts by the police to persuade him. Investigators even offered to reduce his sentence in exchange for revealing the money's location, but he chose to remain silent. He was certain of one thing. After his release in 2010, the fortune would still be waiting for him in a safe place. Yes, he received a 14-year sentence, a long time, but in the end, He believed he would finally achieve the wealth he had dreamed of since coming to Germany. That dream, for him, would become a reality, and so ended one of the boldest and smartest robberies in Germany's history. Yet its memory remains etched in the records of major crimes, a heist that came close to perfection. And now, dear viewer, share your thoughts with us in the comments.